They say that some choices stay with you forever, like echoes that ripple across the surface of the life you thought you had carefully built. As I look out at the rows of grapevines stretching across the vineyard, I can still feel the weight of those choices, the things I left behind for a few moments of passion and the thrill of secrecy. This vineyard, once a haven, now feels like a witness to every step I took down a path I thought I'd buried with silence and time. I was 62 that summer, a woman who'd lived a full life, or so I thought. Victor and I had spent decades working side by side to build this vineyard, turning it into something we could pass down, something that felt permanent. The endless days of sun and soil, of wine festivals and tourists milling through, became our shared legacy. But somewhere along the way, the life we'd built together became a routine I couldn't escape, a world where each day felt a little emptier than the last. When Tessa arrived with her new boyfriend, Max, I thought little of it. Young love, I told myself, watching them with the curiosity that comes from knowing how the bloom of romance can change over time. Max was polite, easygoing, a natural fit with Tessa's headstrong ambition. But there was something about him, something that intrigued me, something I thought I had left behind with the years. It was the way he spoke about the vineyard, about his dreams of becoming a sommelier, as if he saw the vineyard in a way that even I had forgotten. At first, it was innocent. A shared glass of wine on the terrace, a casual walk through the vines to discuss the harvest. But those conversations grew, each one stretching out like an unanswered question, drawing us into a space where the silence spoke more than words. And before I knew it, we had crossed a line, slipping into a world that was as dangerous as it was intoxicating. Even now, I can't say exactly what drew me to him. If it was his youth, his confidence, or simply the chance to feel something, anything, beyond the quiet I had grown used to. All I know is that the choice I made that summer left marks I can't erase, scars that linger in the corners of this place, hidden in the rows of vines and the shadows of the wine cellar. I sometimes wonder if Tessa will ever understand, if she'll ever look back and see the cracks that were there all along, or if she'll remember me the way she once did. A grandmother who was as constant as the seasons, as rooted as the vines. But secrets have a way of rising to the surface, and this vineyard, with all its secrets, knows the truth. As the sun sets over the vineyard, casting the world in hues of crimson and gold, I feel the weight of that summer like a whisper in the air, a reminder of the things we bury and the things that refuse to stay hidden. The vineyard lay stretched across the rolling hills, the late summer sun casting long shadows between rows of grapevines heavy with fruit. It was a sight I'd seen for decades, but one that never lost its quiet beauty. Each cluster of grapes, every twisted vine, felt like a part of me, rooted deep in the soil of this place that Victor and I had cultivated together. Victor had always been the driving force behind our life here. A former attorney, he approached the vineyard with the same methodical determination he'd used in his career. He'd thrown himself into learning the science of winemaking, finding satisfaction in soil tests and irrigation systems, in the steady rhythms of harvest and crush. But somewhere along the way, his passion for the vineyard had consumed him, leaving little room for anything or anyone else. And so I had taken my place beside him, managing the business from the sidelines, arranging tours, greeting visitors, attending wine festivals. I became the gracious face of the vineyard, the host who smiled and poured wine for guests who marveled at the rows of vines stretching to the horizon. I loved the vineyard, but as the years went by, I realized that my life had become a series of tasks. A routine that left me feeling like one of the vines, rooted and steady, but drained of color. It was that summer, just as the harvest season was about to begin, that Tessa called, asking if she and her new boyfriend could spend a few weeks at the vineyard. She'd been studying art history in San Francisco, a passion she'd pursued with a kind of fierce independence that reminded me of her mother. Tessa and I had always been close, though her visits had grown rare over the years. She was driven, focused on her studies and her future, and though I missed her, I was proud of her. She had always felt like a fresh breeze, a reminder of the life and passion that seemed to have faded from my own. When Tessa arrived with Max, I greeted them on the porch, the familiar creak of the old wooden boards underfoot as I opened the door. Tessa wrapped her arms around me, her enthusiasm filling the space with a warmth I hadn't felt in months. "It's so good to see you, Grandma," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder as she hugged me tightly. I smiled, pulling back to look at her. "You too, Tessa. It's been too long." She laughed, brushing her hair back. "This is Max," she said, turning to the young man beside her. "He's an aspiring sommelier, and I told him this was the best place to learn about wine." Max extended a hand, his gaze steady as he looked at me. He was tall, with an easy confidence, his hand warm as it met mine. There was a spark in his eyes, a glint of curiosity and appreciation, as he glanced over my shoulder toward the vineyard, as if he were taking in every detail. "Thank you for letting me stay, Mrs. March," he said, his voice soft but resonant. "This place is remarkable." "Please call me Iris," I replied, smiling. "We're family, after all." His smile widened, and for a moment, I found myself caught off guard by his presence. He was young, with a kind of quiet charm that was both refreshing and unsettling. I brushed the thought aside, reminding myself that he was here with Tessa, here to learn about the vineyard and the wine industry. But even as I tried to ignore it, I felt a strange energy in the air, a tension that lingered like the scent of the grapes ripening in the sun. As the days passed, Max and Tessa settled into the rhythms of life at the vineyard. Tessa spent her mornings sketching by the lake or wandering through the fields with her camera, capturing images of the vines and the light as it danced over the hills. She had always had an artistic eye, a talent that seemed to bloom here, surrounded by the beauty of the vineyard. Max, on the other hand, was eager to learn, shadowing Victor as he moved through the rows of grapes, listening attentively as Victor explained the intricacies of winemaking. I would watch them from the kitchen window, a pang of something I couldn't name settling in my chest as I saw Max's admiration for Victor, the way he seemed captivated by the details and precision that my husband took such pride in. Victor, of course, was pleased with the attention. He had always thrived on respect and admiration, on the validation that came from being seen as an expert. And yet, as I watched them, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, a sense of connection that I hadn't felt with Victor in years. In the evenings, we would gather on the terrace, sharing a bottle of wine as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the vineyard in hues of gold and violet. Tessa would talk about her plans, her dreams of opening a gallery someday, while Max listened, his gaze drifting occasionally to the vines, to the estate that seemed to hold a quiet allure for him. One evening, as Victor excused himself to take a call, Max turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "How did you and Mr. March build this place?" he asked, his voice soft, his gaze steady. I hesitated, surprised by the question, by the genuine curiosity in his eyes. "It took years," I replied, glancing out at the vineyard. "We started small, just a few rows of vines, and slowly grew it into what you see now." He nodded, his expression contemplative. "It must have taken a lot of dedication, a lot of love." There was something in his tone, a hint of admiration mixed with a curiosity that felt almost personal. I felt a warmth rise in my chest, a reminder of the early days with Victor, the dreams we had shared before they had faded into routine and silence. "Yes," I said softly, more to myself than to him. "A lot of love." In the days that followed, Max and I found ourselves crossing paths more often. He would linger in the kitchen as I prepared lunch, asking questions about the vineyard, about the wines we produced, his gaze lingering a second too long as I explained the nuances of each vintage. His curiosity was infectious, and I found myself drawn into conversations that felt less like lectures and more like shared moments, a quiet connection that built with each passing day. One afternoon, as I showed him the cellar, explaining the aging process, he stood close, his attention focused intently on me. The air was thick with the scent of oak and wine, the cool darkness of the cellar wrapping around us like a secret. "You have a gift for this, Iris," he said, his voice low, his words carrying a weight that made my heart skip a beat. I looked at him, caught off guard by the intensity in his gaze. There was something there, something that felt both forbidden and exhilarating, a spark that I hadn't felt in years. I told myself it was innocent, a simple compliment, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more beneath the surface, a tension that lingered between us like a promise unspoken. That evening, as I lay in bed beside Victor, his quiet breathing filling the room, I found myself replaying the conversation. The way Max's gaze had lingered, the warmth in his voice as he spoke my name. It was a feeling I hadn't felt in years, a sense of possibility, of something unknown waiting just beyond the edges of the life I had built. I tried to brush it aside, to tell myself that it was foolish, that whatever I thought I had seen in Max's eyes was nothing more than a trick of the mind. But as the days turned into weeks, that feeling grew, a quiet thrill that made every glance, every touch, feel charged with an energy I could neither deny nor ignore. And so, as the summer stretched on, I found myself caught in a web of desire and fear, a longing that both excited and terrified me, a reminder that beneath the quiet life I had lived, there was still a part of me that wanted something more, something real, something that could no longer be hidden among the shadows of the vineyard. The first time Max's hand brushed mine, it was an accident. Or at least, that's what I told myself as I felt the warmth of his touch linger long after he'd pulled his hand away. We had been in the cellar, going over the barrels marked for the season's reserve, discussing the subtleties of aging and flavor, the way the wine took on character over time. It was something I had explained 100 times before, but with him, it felt new, charged with a quiet intensity that made the air between us feel thick, electric. I should have stepped back, should have let the moment pass. But instead, I found myself leaning into it, savoring the thrill that came with his closeness, the way his presence filled the quiet spaces in my mind. He was respectful, never overt, and yet there was a tension in every shared glance, a subtle invitation in every word. It was a connection we both felt but never acknowledged, a line we danced along without ever fully crossing. Until one evening, when the line between what was innocent and what was forbidden finally disappeared. Victor had left for a last-minute meeting in the city, his absence leaving a strange quiet over the vineyard. Tessa was visiting a friend, and for the first time in weeks, Max and I found ourselves alone. It was dusk, the vineyard bathed in the soft glow of twilight, the colors muted and warm, as if the world itself had slowed down to a gentle hush. We sat on the terrace, sharing a glass of Merlot, the silence between us comfortable, unforced. The air was cool, the scent of the vines mingling with the rich aroma of the wine, and for a while, we simply sat in the stillness, letting the quiet speak for us. But as the light faded, I felt a shift, a sense of something unspoken waiting in the shadows, a tension that had been building for weeks finally rising to the surface. Max set his glass down, his gaze steady as he looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Iris," he said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper, as though he were afraid to break the stillness around us. I looked at him, feeling my heart race, a mixture of fear and excitement coursing through me. "Yes?" There was a pause, a silence that felt heavier than words, and then, without thinking, I reached for his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath mine, the quiet thrill of a touch I had only imagined. It was a simple gesture, a fleeting connection, but in that moment, it felt like crossing a threshold, a step into a world where the rules no longer applied. His hand tightened around mine, his gaze never wavering. And before I knew it, we were leaning toward each other, the space between us shrinking until there was nothing left but the quiet certainty of what we both wanted. From that night on, our relationship took on a new intensity, a hidden thread woven into the fabric of our days, a secret that lingered in every glance, every stolen touch. We were careful, cautious, moving through the vineyard with the practiced ease of people who had something to hide. A dance that became both thrilling and terrifying with each passing day. There was a freedom in our secrecy, a sense of liberation that made every moment feel precious, forbidden. The vineyard became our world, a place where time seemed to pause, where we could exist outside the constraints of reality, if only for a while. We would steal moments in the cellar, the cool darkness wrapping around us like a shield, a place where we could lose ourselves in each other, without fear of discovery. But as much as I wanted to let myself fall into the comfort of his arms, there was a part of me that resisted. A quiet voice that reminded me of the life I had built, the trust I was risking. I would lie awake at night, the weight of my choices pressing down on me, filling the silence with a guilt that grew harder to ignore. And yet, even as I told myself that we needed to stop, that I needed to pull back, I knew that I couldn't. He had awakened something in me, a part of myself I had buried long ago, a desire that refused to be silenced. Keeping our relationship hidden became a delicate game, a balancing act that required every ounce of composure I could muster. Tessa remained blissfully unaware, her days filled with art projects and outings with friends. Victor, as always, was preoccupied with the vineyard, his mind occupied by numbers and schedules, by the practicalities of a life that left little room for emotion or spontaneity. But there were moments when I felt his gaze linger, a shadow of suspicion flickering in his eyes, as though he sensed a change in me that he couldn't quite place. He never asked, never confronted me directly, but his silence spoke volumes, a quiet reminder that our lives were built on a foundation that could crumble at any moment. In those moments, I would feel a pang of guilt, a reminder of the life I was risking, the trust I had betrayed. But then Max would find me. His presence, a quiet reassurance, a reminder of the connection we had built, and all my doubts would fade, replaced by the thrill of his touch, the warmth of his smile, the sense of possibility that he brought into my life. We became skilled at hiding, slipping away when no one was watching, finding places where we could exist, if only for a moment, outside the boundaries of our lives. It was exhilarating, this game of secrecy, the thrill of knowing that we were the only ones who shared this world, a place where nothing mattered but the quiet intensity of our connection. But as the days turned into weeks, I felt the weight of our secret grow heavier. A quiet tension that settled over me like a storm waiting to break. I knew that our time was limited, that our world could not remain hidden forever, but I was too deep, too ensnared by the life we had created to pull back. The turning point came one afternoon, as Max and I walked through the vineyard, the sun casting long shadows between the rows of vines. He reached for my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. A simple gesture that felt both comforting and dangerous. A reminder of the life we had built in the spaces between our real lives. "I wish we didn't have to hide," he murmured, his voice filled with a quiet longing, a sadness that mirrored my own. I looked away, feeling a pang of guilt settle over me, a reminder of the life I was risking, the trust I was betraying. "We don't have a choice, Max," I said softly, my voice barely more than a whisper, as though I were afraid to speak the words aloud. He tightened his grip on my hand, his gaze steady. "Maybe we do. Maybe we can make a choice." His words lingered in the air, a quiet invitation that made my heart race. a reminder that our connection was both real and fragile, a thread that could unravel at any moment. But even as I felt the thrill of his words, the possibility of a life beyond the vineyard, I knew that we were bound by the choices we had already made, choices that could never be undone. The thrill of secrecy came with its own weight, a tension that pressed down on me each day, growing heavier with each stolen moment. As Max and I continued our hidden meetings, I could sense the fragility of our world, the thin veneer of normalcy that could crack at any moment. Each time we parted, I felt a mixture of excitement and dread, a quiet fear that lingered like a shadow, a reminder of the consequences that waited just beyond the edges of our carefully maintained facade. It wasn't long before Tessa began to notice the subtle shifts, the changes I couldn't quite hide. She had always been perceptive, quick to pick up on nuances, and I could feel her gaze lingering on me, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes that unsettled me. It was as though she sensed the tension between Max and me, sensed that there was something unspoken in the air, something I couldn't bring myself to explain. I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, tried to keep up the appearance of the grandmother she had always known, the steady presence she trusted. But as the days passed, the weight of my choices became harder to ignore, harder to hide, and I knew that our world was beginning to unravel, one quiet suspicion at a time. One afternoon, as I was in the kitchen preparing lunch, Tessa appeared in the doorway, her expression thoughtful, her gaze steady. She leaned against the doorframe, watching me with an intensity that made my heart race, a silent curiosity that felt both innocent and probing. "You've seemed different lately, Grandma," she said, her tone light but edged with a hint of something I couldn't quite place. "Is everything okay?" I felt a flicker of panic, a sudden urge to look away, to escape her gaze, but I forced myself to smile, hoping it would be enough to ease her suspicions. "Of course, Tessa," I replied, my voice steady, though my heart raced. "Just a little more tired than usual, I suppose." She nodded, her expression thoughtful, her gaze drifting to the window, to the vineyard stretching out beyond. "I don't know. It just feels like there's something on your mind." Her words lingered in the air, filling the space between us with a quiet tension, a sense of inevitability that I couldn't shake. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her that everything was fine, that I was the same grandmother she had always known. But I knew that any attempt to dismiss her concerns would only make her more determined to find the truth, more certain that there was something I was hiding. "It's nothing, Tessa," I said finally, my voice soft, my heart heavy with the weight of the lie. "Just the vineyard, the harvest season. You know how busy it can get." She looked at me for a moment, her gaze steady, a hint of doubt in her eyes. But then she smiled, brushing her hair back, a gesture that seemed to dismiss the tension, if only for a moment. "Okay, Grandma, if you say so." But as she turned to leave, I felt a chill settle over me, a reminder that our secret was no longer safe, that the walls we had built were beginning to crumble, piece by piece. Later that week, I took a drive into town, my mind filled with thoughts of Max, of Tessa, of the precarious balance we had maintained, the life I had risked for something I couldn't quite define. I stopped by the small cafe near the vineyard, hoping to clear my mind, to escape the weight of my choices, if only for a moment. As I sat by the window, nursing a cup of coffee, I noticed Eloise, an old family friend, sitting across the room. She waved me over, her eyes bright with curiosity, her expression warm as she patted the seat beside her. "It's been too long, Iris," she said, her voice filled with the kind of warmth that only comes from years of friendship. "How have you been?" I smiled, settling into the chair, feeling a mixture of relief and trepidation. Eloise had always been perceptive, quick to pick up on things that others missed, and I found myself wondering if she too sensed the changes in me, the quiet secrets I carried. "Busy as always," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "The harvest season keeps us on our toes," She nodded, a knowing look in her eyes. And I hear you've got a young man staying with you. A sommelier, is it? I felt a flicker of panic, my heart racing as I forced myself to nod, to keep my expression calm. Yes, Max, I said, my voice steady, though I could feel the weight of her gaze. He's Tessa's boyfriend, a charming young man. Eloise's expression softened, but there was something in her gaze, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. I've heard some things about him, rumors, mostly. Her words sent a chill through me, a quiet dread settling over me as I forced myself to ask. Rumors? She nodded, her expression serious. Apparently, he's left a trail of broken hearts. Some debts, too, if what I've heard is true. Not that I believe everything I hear, of course. But I thought you should know. Her words lingered, filling the space between us with a sense of unease. A reminder that the life I had built with Max was built on a foundation that could crumble at any moment. I thanked her, brushing off her concerns with a polite smile. But as I left the cafe, her words echoed in my mind, filling me with a quiet dread that I couldn't ignore. That evening, as I sat alone in the darkened house, I found myself questioning everything I had felt, everything I had believed about Max. I wanted to believe that he was different, that our connection was real, but Eloise's words cast a shadow over everything, a reminder that our world was both fragile and dangerous, a life that could be shattered with a single misstep. Back at the vineyard, Victor's behavior began to change as well. Though he had always been quiet, focused on his work, I noticed him watching me more often, his gaze lingering on me with a curiosity that felt both comforting and unsettling. He would ask me questions about my day, about the vineyard, his tone casual but filled with an underlying tension, as though he sensed that there was something I wasn't telling him. One evening, as we sat together on the terrace, he looked at me, his expression thoughtful, his gaze steady. "You've seemed distant lately, Iris," he said, his voice soft, his tone filled with a quiet concern that made my heart ache. I looked away, feeling a mixture of guilt and sadness settle over me, a reminder of the trust I had betrayed, the life I had risked for something I could barely define. "Just busy, Victor. The vineyard, the harvest, you know how it is." He nodded, his gaze never wavering. "I know, but it feels like there's more to it than that." His words lingered in the air, a quiet reminder of the life we had shared, the foundation we had built together. I wanted to tell him the truth, to confess everything, but I knew that our life could never be the same, that our world would shatter with the weight of my choices. And so I said nothing, letting the silence speak for me, letting the quiet between us fill the spaces that words could no longer reach. As the days passed, the tension between us grew unbearable, a quiet storm waiting to break, a life built on secrets that could no longer remain hidden. I felt the weight of my choices pressing down on me, filling the silence with a dread that refused to be ignored. And in the midst of it all, Max remained a constant presence, a reminder of the life I had chosen, the trust I had betrayed. We would steal moments together, slipping away to the hidden corners of the vineyard, finding solace in each other's arms, even as we both felt the fragility of our world, the quiet dread that lingered like a shadow over everything we had built. But even as I clung to him, even as I let myself fall into the comfort of his touch, I knew that our time was running out, that the life we had created in the shadows could not remain hidden forever. And as I looked out over the vineyard, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of inevitability settle over me. A reminder that our secrets would soon come to light, that our world was on the verge of collapse, a storm that would leave nothing but fragments in its wake. I had always thought that secrets, if buried deeply enough, would stay hidden. But as the tension built, woven into every word and every glance, I felt the inevitable reckoning drawing closer, a shadow hanging over us like a storm waiting to break. The discovery came on an evening that started as any other. Tessa had gone into town for a late art class, or so I thought. Victor had retired early with a headache, leaving Max and me alone in the quiet of the vineyard. It was a simple touch, a fleeting moment, a hand on his arm as we talked, a look that lingered just a second too long. But it was enough. We didn't see her until it was too late. Tessa's footsteps on the gravel were quiet, but the moment I saw her standing there, her eyes wide with disbelief and pain, I felt my heart stop, a wave of dread crashing over me as our carefully constructed world shattered in an instant. "Grandma?" Her voice was barely a whisper, filled with a raw hurt that cut deeper than any accusation. Max's face paled, his hand slipping from mine, and for a moment we were all frozen, caught in the painful clarity of the truth. The look in her eyes was one I would never forget, a mixture of betrayal, disbelief, and a grief that was more intense than I could have imagined. Tessa's voice trembled as she spoke, each word like a knife, cutting through the silence. "How could you? Both of you? How could you?" I opened my mouth to explain, but the words wouldn't come. How could I justify the choices I had made, the lines I had crossed? There was nothing I could say, no way to undo the hurt I had caused. "Tessa, Max began, but his voice faltered under her gaze, his guilt as evident as mine. "I trusted you," she cried, her voice breaking. "Both of you. You were supposed to be my family." I wanted to reach out to her, to explain that I hadn't meant for any of this to happen, that it had been a mistake, a moment of weakness. But I knew that my words would mean nothing, that they would only deepen the wound I had inflicted. And so I stood in silence, watching the girl I had loved and raised break before me, the bond we had shared unraveling like the vines in a winter storm. Tears streamed down her face as she looked between us, shaking her head as though trying to make sense of the betrayal. Finally she turned and walked away, leaving us standing there in the quiet devastation of what we had done. The fallout continued the next morning, when Victor found me alone in the kitchen, his expression distant, his gaze filled with a sadness that I had never seen before. He hadn't spoken to me since Tessa had confronted us, and I could feel the weight of his silence pressing down on me, filling the air with a tension that was both suffocating and inescapable. He stood there for a moment, watching me with an intensity that made my heart ache, and then, in a voice that was barely audible, he asked, "Why, Iris? After everything we built? Why?" The words cut through me, a reminder of the life we had shared, the years we had spent building this vineyard, this family. I looked away, unable to meet his gaze, the weight of my choices settling over me like a shroud. "I don't know," I whispered, my voice thick with regret. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It just did." He nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the window, to the vineyard that stretched out before us, a reminder of the life we had built and the trust I had destroyed. "We all make choices, Iris. I just never thought you would make this one." There was a pause, a silence that felt heavier than any words, and then he turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the quiet of the kitchen, the weight of my actions pressing down on me, filling the silence with a grief that I knew would never fully fade. In the days that followed, the vineyard seemed to lose its warmth, its familiarity. The rows of grapevines, once a source of pride and comfort, felt like hollow reminders of the life I had destroyed, the trust I had taken for granted. Victor and I moved through the house in silence, each of us lost in our own world of regret and sorrow, the connection we had shared reduced to a memory that felt more distant with each passing day. Tessa left the vineyard, taking Max with her, though I knew that her relationship with him was over, shattered by the betrayal that had fractured our family. I wanted to reach out to her, to explain, to try to make amends, but I knew that my words would mean nothing, that the damage I had done could never be repaired. And so I remained at the vineyard, moving through the familiar routines with a sense of detachment, as though I were a ghost in my own life, a shadow passing through the remnants of the world I had built. The silence became my companion, a constant reminder of the choices I had made, the life I had lost. I would walk through the rows of vines in the early morning, the cool air filled with the scent of soil and grapes, the quiet of the vineyard a stark contrast to the turmoil within me. The vines felt different now, as though they too bore the weight of my secrets, the shadows of the past lingering in the spaces between the leaves, a reminder of the life I had once known and the life I had left behind. The days drifted by slowly after they left, each one blurring into the next, the quiet of the vineyard becoming a landscape of memories and regrets. Without Tessa's laughter echoing through the house or Victor's familiar presence beside me, the vineyard felt more like a monument to the life I had once known, a life that now seemed as distant as the hills that lined the horizon. In the weeks that followed, I withdrew into a world of solitude. My daily routines carried out with a sense of detachment, as though I were simply going through the motions. I poured wine for empty tables, walked the rows of vines as I had done 1,000 times before, each step a reminder of the choices that had brought me here, the life I had lost. Sometimes, in the early hours of the morning, I would sit on the terrace, watching the sunrise paint the vineyard in hues of pink and gold. And I would let my mind drift back to that summer, to the moments of laughter and warmth that had filled these walls. I would remember Tessa's smile, the sound of her voice, the way she looked at me with a trust I had taken for granted, and I would feel the ache of that loss settle over me, a reminder of the price of my choices, the pain I had caused. I knew that I could never undo what had been done, that the life I had destroyed was gone, replaced by a solitude that felt both punishing and strangely peaceful. In some ways, I felt a sense of relief, a quiet acceptance of the consequences that had been inevitable from the start. I had made my choices, crossed lines that could never be uncrossed, and now I was left to face the world I had created, a world where the echoes of my actions lingered in every corner of this place. As the seasons changed, the vineyard transformed with the passage of time, the vibrant greens of summer fading into the rich golds and reds of autumn, each leaf a reminder of the cycles of life, of the endings and beginnings that marked our journey. The vineyard took on a quieter beauty, a reflection of the acceptance I had come to feel, the understanding that this place, with all its memories and regrets, would always be a part of me. I began to find comfort in the solitude, in the quiet that filled the spaces where laughter and voices had once echoed. I would walk the rows of vines in the cool of the morning, my footsteps the only sound in the stillness, a reminder of the simplicity of this life, the beauty that remained even in the absence of the people I had loved. In those quiet moments, I felt a sense of peace, a realization that my choices, painful as they had been, had led me to a place of honesty, a place where I could confront the person I had become and the life I had left behind. I knew that I could never return to the past, never reclaim the trust I had lost, but I could find a way to live with the scars, to carry them with a sense of acceptance, a reminder of the lessons I had learned. Months later, as the vineyard lay dormant in the depths of winter, I stood on the terrace, looking out over the bare vines, their twisted branches silhouetted against the pale sky. The vineyard was quiet, stripped of its warmth and color, a landscape of shadows and stillness, a reflection of the life I had come to know. But in that quiet, I felt a sense of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was the promise of renewal, of growth that would come with the return of spring. I knew that the vineyard would bloom again, that the cycles of life would continue, bringing with them new possibilities, new beginnings. And as I stood there, watching the first light of dawn break over the hills, I felt a quiet sense of closure settle over me, a realization that I could find a way forward, that I could carry the memories and regrets of my past without letting them define me. The vineyard would go on, as it always had, a place of beauty and solitude, a reminder of the choices we make and the lives we leave behind. With a final look at the vines, I turned and walked back into the house, ready to face whatever came next, carrying with me the lessons of that summer, the memories of the life I had known, and the quiet hope that one day I would find peace. It was late afternoon, and I was cleaning my bedroom when I heard the door creak behind me. I turned around, and there was Alden standing in the doorway, staring at the thing in my hands. My heart stopped. How could I explain this? The object was far from innocent. A large, brightly colored, toy. One that no polite conversation could sidestep. I had pulled it out of the drawer to dust the back of the cabinet, not thinking much of it. I had locked the door, or so I thought. Alden was my 23-year-old stepson. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. He worked at a local brewery and usually stayed out late with friends after his shifts. But there he was, tall and lean, his dark hair falling into his amused blue eyes. "What's that?" he asked, his voice caught somewhere between curious and teasing. My face went red hot. I dropped the item like it had burned me and grabbed the first thing I could find, a throw pillow from the bed, to cover it. "It's none of your business," I stammered, feeling my throat tighten. But his expression didn't change. If anything, he leaned against the doorframe, his curiosity growing. "You know, you don't have to act so embarrassed," he said with a small smirk. "It's not like I haven't seen something like that before." I wanted to crawl into a hole. The audacity of this kid. Well, man, really. To stand there so casually, completely unfazed, while my world spun out of control. I forced a laugh, desperate to diffuse the tension. "Alden, seriously, go mind your own business. You shouldn't even be in here." But he didn't move. For a moment, there was silence between us, heavy and almost unbearable. He wasn't looking at the pillow in my hands anymore. He was looking at me. His gaze was different, not the usual laid-back or playful glances I was used to. This one lingered too long, too intently. It was as if he'd peeled back a layer of the person he thought I was, and found someone else entirely. I felt something strange, a flicker of warmth deep in my chest, followed by a sharp pang of guilt. This was wrong. Whatever this was, it was absolutely wrong. I was his stepmother, for God's sake. I was married to his father. I shook my head and broke the silence. "Please, Alden, just go." He finally shrugged, lifting his hands in mock surrender. All right, he said, his tone light again. But before he left, he gave me one last look. A look that sent my already unsettled thoughts into overdrive. As the door closed behind him, I sat down on the edge of the bed, the pillow still clutched against my chest. My heart was racing. I couldn't even bring myself to put the item back into the drawer. It felt like something invisible had shifted in the air between us. And no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I knew I'd never see Alden the same way again. For the rest of the evening, I couldn't shake the moment from my mind. I tried. I cooked dinner, folded laundry, and even sat next to Victor on the couch while he flipped through old westerns on the TV. But Alden's face, that amused smirk, and the unsettling glint in his eyes haunted me. Victor barely noticed my distraction. That was nothing new. He'd been wrapped up in his hobbies, gardening, woodworking, crossword puzzles, for years now, ever since his retirement. I didn't resent him for it. That would have been too easy. But sometimes I felt like more of a live-in caretaker than a wife. At one point, I glanced down the hall and caught Alden's shadow as he moved around in his room. I could hear the faint hum of music coming through his door, a low bass line that didn't match the quiet stillness of the rest of the house. My heart jumped for no reason I could justify, and I turned my attention back to my husband. Victor was snoring softly, his chin tilted down toward his chest. He'd fallen asleep in his recliner again, the TV still droning on. I thought about waking him, but what would be the point? Instead, I stood and wandered into the kitchen, grateful for a moment of solitude. But I wasn't alone for long. Alden walked in, his bare feet quiet against the hardwood floor. He wore a faded t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair tousled like he'd just run his hands through it. "Hey," he said casually, opening the fridge and grabbing a bottle of water. You're up late. I could say the same about you, I replied, keeping my tone light. He smiled, leaning against the counter. Just unwinding. You know, it's not easy being under this roof sometimes. The comment made me pause. What do you mean? He shrugged, but there was a hint of something serious in his expression. It's nothing. Just living here again, I guess. I feel like I don't fit anymore. I softened at that. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of maternal concern. It's just temporary, Alden. You'll figure things out. You're smart and capable. You'll land on your feet. Thanks, Melina, he said, his voice quieter now. I appreciate that. For a moment we stood in silence. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, the space between us shrinking even though neither of us moved. His eyes lingered on mine, and I felt that same flicker of warmth in my chest again. I cleared my throat and busied myself wiping the counter, desperate to break whatever spell was threatening to take hold. But Alden wasn't finished. About earlier, he started, his tone turning playful again. You don't have to be embarrassed, you know. I mean, we're all human, right? My hand froze mid-wipe, and I turned to him, trying to keep my composure. Alden, let's not talk about that, all right? It was an accident, and it's not worth bringing up again. Okay, he said, raising his hands in surrender, but there was a teasing edge in his smile that made my stomach flip. He walked past me then, close enough that I caught a faint whiff of his cologne. I didn't turn around, but I could feel his presence behind me for a moment before he finally left the kitchen. That night, as I lay in bed next to Victor, my mind raced. What was happening to me? To us? To this house? I'd always been able to maintain clear boundaries, lines that weren't meant to be crossed. But Alden had a way of bending those lines, even when he wasn't trying to. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure I wanted him to stop. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I prepared breakfast like I always did. Eggs, toast, and coffee for Victor, a smoothie for myself. Alden was the last to come into the kitchen, as usual, his hair still damp from a shower. He greeted Victor with a casual morning, and me with a warm smile that made my pulse quicken. The three of us sat at the table, the clinking of silverware and occasional snippets of conversation filling the air. But underneath it all, I could feel the tension. Every time Alden's hand brushed mine as we passed the salt or refilled coffee, it felt deliberate. I caught him watching me more than once, his gaze steady and unreadable. Victor, of course, noticed none of this. After breakfast, Alden offered to help me clean up. Normally, he would have disappeared into his room or out with friends, so his offer caught me off guard. You don't have to, I said, stacking plates in the sink. I want to, he replied, already grabbing a dish rag. We worked in silence for a while, but the air between us felt charged. At one point, I reached for a glass at the same time he did, and our hands collided. Neither of us pulled away immediately. You're different, he said quietly, his voice just above a whisper. What do you mean? I asked, my throat suddenly dry. He hesitated, his eyes searching mine. I don't know. You don't act like other women your age. I laughed nervously, stepping back to create some distance. Well, that's flattering, I suppose. It's not just that, he continued, his tone serious now. You're real. You actually listen. You see people. The sincerity in his voice took me off guard. I didn't know what to say, so I turned back to the dishes. But as I scrubbed, I felt his presence close behind me. My heart was racing again, and I hated how much I wanted him to stay there. Before I could gather my thoughts, Victor's voice called from the living room. Melina? Where's my crossword book? The moment shattered, and Alden stepped back, giving me a small, knowing smile. I'll let you get back to him, he said, his voice light again. As he walked away, I felt a mix of relief and longing. I knew I was playing with fire, but some part of me couldn't help but reach for the heat. That afternoon, I busied myself with errands, anything to keep my mind occupied. But when I returned home, I found Alden sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the yard. He looked lost in thought, a far cry from the confident young man I was used to seeing. Hey, I said softly as I approached. He looked up, his face breaking into a small smile. Hey. Everything all right? He hesitated before answering. Yeah, just thinking. About what? About life, I guess. Where I'm headed. Where I should be headed. I sat down beside him, keeping a safe distance but close enough that I could feel the warmth of his presence. You're young, Alden. You don't have to have it all figured out yet. Maybe, he said, his gaze still fixed on the yard. Then, after a pause, he added, You ever feel like you're meant for something different? Like you're trapped in the wrong story? His words hit closer to home than I cared to admit. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay, but the truth was, I didn't believe that myself. Instead, I placed a hand on his shoulder and squeezed gently. You're not trapped, I said, hoping he wouldn't notice the tremor in my voice. For a moment, he covered my hand with his, and the gesture felt impossibly intimate. I pulled away quickly, but the damage was done. Another line crossed, another boundary blurred, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to stop it anymore. That evening, the sky turned dark with an oncoming storm. The air hung heavy, as though the world itself was waiting for something to happen. Victor had gone to bed early, as he often did, complaining about an aching shoulder. I had settled into the living room, a book in hand, but I couldn't focus. The storm outside mirrored the one building within me, something restless, unpredictable, and dangerous. Alden was in the kitchen, the sound of the fridge opening and closing, carrying through the quiet house. I could hear the faint clink of glass as he poured himself a drink. Moments later, he appeared in the doorway of the living room, holding 2 glasses. Whiskey? He asked, raising an eyebrow. I blinked, caught off guard. I don't usually drink this late. Well, maybe tonight's an exception, he said with a grin, handing me a glass without waiting for an answer. I hesitated, but took it. The cool glass pressing against my palm. Alden sank into the armchair across from me, stretching his legs out casually. The lamp beside me cast a warm glow across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw and the faint shadow of stubble on his chin. What are you reading? He asked, nodding toward the book in my lap. Just something light, I replied, holding it up briefly. Nothing exciting, he smirked. I find that hard to believe. I laughed softly, taking a sip of the whiskey. It burned, but it was a welcome distraction from the tension that had been building all day. For a while, we sat in comfortable silence, the storm outside growing louder. But then he spoke again, his voice low. Can I ask you something? I glanced at him warily. Depends on what it is. He swirled the liquid in his glass, his eyes fixed on it as though he were gathering his thoughts. Do you ever feel stuck? His question startled me. It was eerily similar to the one he'd asked earlier on the porch, but now there was a different weight to it. Sometimes, I admitted, my voice quieter than I intended. He looked up then, his eyes meeting mine. You don't seem like someone who should be stuck. You're too alive for that. I felt my cheeks flush, and I looked away, setting my glass down on the coffee table. Alden, you shouldn't say things like that. Why not? It's true. His words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. I stood abruptly, needing to put space between us. I think it's time we called it a night, I said, avoiding his gaze. But before I could leave the room, the power went out. The sudden darkness was disorienting, and I froze mid-step. Oh, I muttered, my voice shaky. It's just the storm, Alden said, his tone calm. I heard him stand, the soft shuffle of his feet on the carpet. Hold on, I'll find a flashlight. I heard him move closer, the faint rustle of fabric as he passed me. Then his hand brushed against mine in the dark, and I sucked in a sharp breath. Sorry, he murmured, but he didn't pull away. His hand lingered, warm against mine, and the air between us seemed to shift. I didn't move. I couldn't. My heart was pounding so loudly I was certain he could hear it. Melina, he said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. I turned toward him, even though I couldn't see him in the dark. But I could feel him, his presence, his warmth, his steady breathing. And then his hand slid up to my wrist, holding it gently. This is a bad idea, I said, my voice trembling. I know, he replied, but he didn't let go. The first crack of lightning lit up the room for a brief second, and in that moment, I saw his face, earnest, vulnerable, and impossibly close. And then he kissed me. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as though he was waiting for me to push him away. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself leaning into him, my hands gripping his shirt as though he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. When the lights flickered back on, we broke apart, both of us breathing hard. The reality of what we'd just done hit me like a wave, and I stepped back, my hands trembling. This can't happen, I said, shaking my head. Alden didn't argue. He just stood there, his expression unreadable. "I know," he said again, his voice steady. But the damage was done. The next few days were a blur of stolen glances and unspoken words. I avoided Alden as much as I could, throwing myself into chores and errands, anything to keep my mind occupied. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't forget the feel of his lips on mine, or the way his hand had lingered on my wrist. One evening, as I was folding laundry in the guest room, Alden appeared in the doorway. "We need to talk," he said, his voice firm. I didn't look up. "There's nothing to talk about." "Yes, there is." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. I sighed, setting the laundry down and finally meeting his gaze. "Alden, whatever this is, it has to stop. It's wrong." "Is it?" he asked, his tone challenging. "Because it doesn't feel wrong to me." His words sent a shiver down my spine, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You don't understand. If Victor ever found out—" "He won't," Alden interrupted. "And even if he did, do you really think he'd care? He barely notices you anymore." His words stung, partly because they were true, but that didn't make them right. "This isn't about him," I said, my voice rising. "It's about us, about the fact that whatever this is, it can't happen. It's not just wrong, it's impossible." Alden took a step closer, his eyes locked on mine. "Why? Because you're afraid of what people might think? Because you're afraid of what you might think?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. "Melina," he continued, his voice softer now, "I'm not trying to make this harder for you. But I can't pretend I don't feel something for you, and I don't think you can either." I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, and I looked away. "You don't understand," I whispered. "Then explain it to me," he said, his tone pleading. But I couldn't. I couldn't explain the war raging inside me, the guilt, the fear, the longing. So instead I shook my head and pushed past him, leaving the room without another word. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of Victor's breathing beside me. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, none of which I could untangle. At some point, I got up and went to the kitchen, hoping a glass of water would help calm my nerves. But as I stepped into the hallway, I froze. Alden's door was open, and he was standing there, leaning against the doorframe as though he'd been waiting for me. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice low. I shook my head, unable to find my voice. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, the silence between us heavy and charged. And then, without thinking, I turned and walked back to my room, closing the door behind me. But even as I lay back down, I knew this wasn't over. Whatever this was, this impossible, dangerous thing between us, it wasn't going away. And I wasn't sure I wanted it to. The next time it happened, there wasn't a storm to blame, nor a flickering light to hide behind. This time, it was deliberate. It started in the laundry room of all places. I was pulling warm towels from the dryer, the mundane rhythm of folding them, offering some kind of escape. The house was quiet. Victor had gone to a friend's house to watch a game, and I thought I had the place to myself. Then I heard the soft creak of the floorboards behind me. "You're always working," Alden said, his voice light but laced with something I couldn't quite place. I didn't turn around. "Someone has to," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. He chuckled softly. "Fair enough, but don't you ever get tired of it?" "Tired of what?" "Taking care of everything, taking care of everyone. When's the last time someone took care of you?" His words cut through me like a knife. I turned then, clutching a folded towel against my chest like a shield. "Alden, I don't think this is a conversation we should be having." "Why not?" he asked, leaning casually against the doorframe. He looked so at ease, so unbothered, but his eyes told a different story. They were sharp, searching, and impossibly focused on me. "Because," I said, my voice faltering. "It's not appropriate." "Appropriate," he repeated as though testing the word. "That's not the same as honest, though, is it?" I wanted to argue, to shut him down before he could say anything else that would make this worse. But before I could, he stepped closer, closing the distance between us. "You don't have to pretend with me, Melina," he said softly. "I see you. I see the way you carry this house, the way you keep everything together while everyone else just takes. Don't you think you deserve something for yourself?" My throat tightened, and I shook my head, stepping back until I felt the edge of the counter against my hips. "Alden, whatever this is, It has to stop. He reached out then, his hand brushing against mine. It was such a small, simple gesture, but it felt like the ground beneath me was shifting. Tell me you don't feel it too, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Because I couldn't tell him that. I couldn't lie to him, or to myself. And then, just like that night in the living room, he kissed me. But this time, I didn't stop him. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments and whispered secrets. We were careful, or at least we thought we were. Alden was good at finding excuses to linger in the same room as me, offering to help with dinner, fixing a broken cabinet door, even volunteering to run errands with me. At first, it was thrilling, the rush of something forbidden. But the reality of our situation weighed heavily on me. I knew it couldn't last. I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. One afternoon, as I was putting away groceries, Alden came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. I stiffened, glancing toward the doorway to make sure no one was there. Alden, I hissed, trying to pull away. Victor could walk in any minute. He's at the hardware store. Alden said, his voice calm. Relax. But I couldn't relax, not anymore. The paranoia was starting to eat away at me. Every time Victor looked at me, I wondered if he knew. Every time Bethany, our nosy neighbor, waved at me from across the street, I felt like she could see right through me. We need to talk, I said, turning to face Alden. About what? He asked, his expression unreadable. About this. About us. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of anger in his eyes. What about us? This has to stop, I said, forcing the words out. It's too risky. It's not fair to Victor. Fair to Victor? He repeated, his voice rising. What about fair to you? Do you even hear yourself? You're so busy worrying about him that you don't even think about what you want. What I want doesn't matter, I snapped. It's not about me. That's bullshit, Alden shot back. You deserve to be happy, Melina. You deserve to be with someone who actually sees you. The words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong. But I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew he was right. The breaking point came a few weeks later. Victor had invited Bethany and her husband over for dinner, and I was doing my best to play the role of the perfect hostess. But Bethany's sharp eyes seemed to be on me all night, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something. After dinner, as I was cleaning up in the kitchen, Bethany cornered me. You've been awfully distracted lately, she said, her tone casual but her eyes probing. Just busy, I replied, forcing a smile. You know how it is. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. Does Victor know? I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Know what? She shrugged, her expression unreadable. Whatever's going on with you and Alden. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, my voice shaking. Bethany smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Just be careful, Melina. Secrets have a way of coming out. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop replaying Bethany's words in my mind. I felt trapped, caught between two worlds that couldn't coexist. The next morning, Alden found me in the garden, pulling weeds with more force than necessary. You're avoiding me, he said, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. I'm trying to protect us, I replied, not looking up. Protect us from what? He asked, stepping closer. From this blowing up in our faces, I said, standing and wiping my hands on my jeans. Bethany knows, Alden. She knows. He frowned, his expression darkening. How could she know? I don't know, but she does, I said, my voice rising. And if she tells Victor? She won't, he said firmly. You don't know that, I snapped. You don't understand how dangerous this is. Alden grabbed my hand, his grip strong but not painful. What I understand is that I don't want to lose you. The raw emotion in his voice caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. You won't, I said finally, my voice barely more than a whisper. But we have to be careful. For both our sakes. The days that followed were tense. Bethany didn't say anything to Victor, at least not that I knew of. But the weight of her suspicion hung over me like a cloud. Alden tried to reassure me, but even he seemed more on edge than usual. Then, one evening, Victor came home earlier than expected. I was in the laundry room with Alden, the two of us standing closer than we should have been. When we heard the front door open, we sprang apart like guilty teenagers. Victor called my name, his voice carrying through the house. In here, I replied, my voice steady despite the panic rising in my chest. Victor appeared in the doorway, his eyes sweeping over the room. For a moment I thought he was going to say something, but then he just nodded. Dinner ready? Almost, I said quickly. He left without another word, but the look he gave me lingered long after he was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment in the laundry room, the way Victor's eyes had lingered on me just a second too long. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to end it. Whatever this was between Alden and me, it felt too big, too consuming, to simply walk away from. But deep down I knew the storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. It started with Victor coming home unexpectedly early, but this time, it wasn't just the timing that caught me off guard. His face was tight, his expression unreadable, as he stepped into the house and set his briefcase down with a deliberate thud. Alden, Victor called, his voice sharp enough to make my stomach drop. Alden appeared in the hallway moments later, his casual demeanor contrasting Victor's obvious tension. What's up? He asked, leaning against the wall, hands in his pockets. Victor's eyes narrowed. We need to talk. Now. The tone in his voice left no room for argument. Alden glanced at me briefly, concern flickering in his eyes, before following Victor into the living room. I stood frozen in the kitchen, my heart pounding. I couldn't hear their words at first, just the low rumble of Victor's voice and the occasional quieter responses from Alden. But as their conversation escalated, the words became clearer. I know what's been going on, Victor said, his voice like ice. What are you talking about? Alden replied, his tone calm but guarded. Don't play dumb with me, Victor snapped. I've seen the way you look at her, the way she looks at you. Do you think I'm blind? My blood ran cold. He knew, or at least he suspected enough to confront Alden. Victor, you're imagining things, Alden said, his voice steadier than I thought possible. There's nothing going on. Don't lie to me, Victor roared, and the sound of something, a glass maybe, shattering followed. I couldn't stay hidden any longer. I stepped into the doorway, my hands trembling. Victor, stop? Both men turned to me, their expressions polar opposites. Victor's was a mix of anger and betrayal, while Alden's held something closer to defiance. Melina, Victor said, his voice quieter now but no less dangerous. Tell me the truth. Is there something going on between you two? I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. My silence was answer enough. Victor laughed bitterly, running a hand through his thinning hair. I knew it, he said, his voice cracking. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew. Victor, please, I began, stepping closer. Don't, he snapped, holding up a hand. Don't try to explain it. There's nothing you can say that will make this okay. The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. Finally, Victor turned to Alden, his eyes blazing. You're out, he said coldly. Pack your things and leave, tonight. Alden stood his ground, his jaw tightening. I'm not going anywhere. Yes, you are, Victor shot back. You're not going to stay under my roof and disrespect me like this. I think you should calm down, Alden said, his tone low but firm. That only made Victor angrier. He stepped closer to Alden, his fists clenched at his sides. Don't tell me to calm down, you little... Stop it, I shouted, stepping between them. Both of you, just stop. Victor turned to me, his eyes filled with hurt. How could you, Melina? He asked, his voice breaking. After everything I've done for you? I didn't mean for this to happen, I said, tears streaming down my face. I never wanted to hurt you. Well, you did, he said bitterly. And now I have to deal with the fact that my own wife and my son... He broke off, shaking his head. I can't even say it. Alden reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I couldn't handle his touch. Not now, not with Victor watching. I think it's best if I leave, I said quietly. Victor stared at me, his face hardening. You're not going anywhere, he said firmly. This is my house. If anyone's leaving, it's him. Victor, I began, but he cut me off. No, I don't want to hear it, he said, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. You've made your choice, Melina, and now you're going to live with the consequences. Alden left that night. He packed a bag without a word, his movements tense and mechanical. I followed him to the driveway, my heart breaking with every step. I'm sorry, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. He turned to me, his expression softer than I expected. "This isn't over," he said, his voice steady. "You know that, right?" I nodded, but I didn't say anything. Because as much as I wanted to believe him, I wasn't sure if it was true. As his car disappeared down the street, I felt an ache deep in my chest, a mix of guilt, loss, and something I couldn't quite name. The days that followed were unbearable. Victor barely spoke to me, his silence more punishing than any words could have been. I threw myself into household tasks, desperate to keep busy, but nothing could distract me from the emptiness I felt. And then, a week later, the letter arrived. It was from Alden. No return address, just my name written in his familiar handwriting. I opened it with trembling hands, my heart pounding as I unfolded the paper. "Melina, I know things are complicated right now, but I need you to know that I meant what I said. This isn't over. I don't care what anyone else thinks or says. I can't just walk away from you. I won't. When you're ready, I'll be waiting. Always, eh?" I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to burn it and pretend it never existed. But another part of me, a part I didn't want to admit to, clung to his words like a lifeline. That night, I tucked the letter into the back of my dresser drawer, hiding it away like a secret I wasn't ready to share with the world. Because deep down, I knew Alden was right. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot.